Hello, everyone. My name is Phil, and I'm a doctor who loves to play and talk about board games. While I try to stay up to date with the latest hotness, I've really enjoyed playing older titles, and Imperial Steam was one that I played recently that I felt I should talk about. This review will have a quick overview of how the game plays, what stands out to me as interesting in terms of mechanisms. I'll do some game comparisons, a peer review with comments from other players, and finally, my rating and review of the game. I'll talk about the solo mode too and dedicate some time to how that plays. Imperial Steam came out in 2021 and is by the designer of Lignum, another game I need to get played. But in Imperial Steam, you are a railroad business manager, expanding out the railways from Wien in Austria to Trieste in Italy in the mid 1800s. The game is an economically based Euro game featuring worker placement, action selection, route building, and some contract fulfillment. Even though these mechanisms sound ubiquitous to many other Euro games, this one feels a little different, and I'll tell you why. Imperial Steam features a few things that make it stand out. Firstly, you have the concept of investors in this game. You take contracts which allow you to acquire investors, and you place them on your investor track. As you increase your share prices, while at the same time losing reputation on the reputation track, more on that later, you have the chance to, for free, divest and gain money. However, you must place an investor out of the track, and for each investor used this way to gain essentially free money by the end of the game, you lose 10% of your final scoring for each investor, which is based on how much money you have and then subtracted by that 10% or more. So you must balance the enticing prospect of cash flow, which is necessary in this game as money is pretty tight, with the looming loss of money at the end of the game, which could make or break your score. Speaking of reputation, this is a dynamic track that allows you to, if you meet or exceed the reputation of different cities of the game, hire workers from those cities. Also, if you, throughout the game, deliver coal to these cities, you can acquire special keys to the city, which will give you bonus money at the end of the game. Finally, whoever is furthest on the track will be first player in the next round. There's a lot of moving up and down this track during the game, and one of the actions is to spend 10 money to move up the track one spot any number of times. And this action was pretty interesting because not only do you need to think about player order, but also make sure you have enough reputation to be able to hire workers from different cities and to score if you've delivered coal to them. And in addition to that, you also have the opportunity to bid for player turn order and place yourself at a starting point on this track. And so that is one of the first key decisions that you need to make that involves this reputation track. Finally, I think the scoring of this game is very interesting, not only in how the game is mechanically scored, which you take into account the investor tracks, the money acquired, the keys, the contracts that are fulfilled throughout the game, but also at the end of the game, it's really interesting with the contracts that you, first of all, you have to fulfill them with the factories that you build throughout the game. But the second thing is whether these score or not depends if someone, you or someone, makes a connection to Trieste. If not, none of these contracts are scored. If someone else other than you connects, you must pay that person who made that connection to use their lines and have a chance. But if someone else other than you connects to Trieste, you must pay that person who made the connection to use their lines to have a chance to score your contracts, which offer a lot of money in and of themselves, but you do lose some of that money if you need to use someone else's track. Plus, there are various ways of making money throughout the game, from divesting, fulfilling these contracts, of course, to flipping over your freight cars to passenger cars, or passenger coaches, rather, on your tableau for continuous income, and of course, delivering goods to cities. So while things are pretty tight, there are a few different ways that ultimately can contribute to you gaining money throughout the game and hopefully getting you a good score. So now let's talk about the solo mode. There is an official solo mode created by David Turksey and Mauro Gibertoni. And in this solo mode is available on Board Game Geek. you I'll include a link to it in the show notes. But this solo mode features an action deck and a decision card deck that may or may not you have seen in other Turksy designs or other solo games as well. So you shuffle these decks, and they help you decide on the opponent's turn what action to take, what to prioritize. You follow a cascading algorithm down the card to see if you meet the requirements. And if you need a tiebreaker, you refer to the decision card. So it's a system that has been used in a lot of different games. And overall, the opponent does most everything a regular player does. I'm not going to go through all of the rules, of course. I'm just providing an overview. There are exceptions to uh, this concept of how the opponent plays comparative to you as a regular player. But in the end, it does allow for scoring against an opponent with a money count that is variable from game to game. It's not a beat your own score. In addition to following that algorithm of actions, partway through, you add a card to the deck, each respective deck. It's the first time you go through it and you have to reshuffle. You add a new card out of a stack of 3 or 4 different other cards, which provides a little bit of variability from game to game and different focuses for the opponent to make. And finally, there are ways to make this game more or less difficult, such as adding more of these variable cards to the deck throughout the game or at the start of the game, and giving the opponent more money to start with as well. Next, let's talk about game comparisons. So, on the point about connecting to Trieste as one of the major goals of Imperial Steam, that portion of the game and the scoring thereof reminds me of Lowlands. Lowlands features the concept of building up a dike together as competitors in a semi cooperative fashion. If the dike at the end of the game holds back the water, if it's properly built up, then the game is scored in a certain way, and if it's not built up to hold the water, the game scores another way. Similarly, Imperial Steam has huge consequences with scoring if players are able to connect to Trieste or not. Other game comparisons could include a multitude of rail games that I may or may not have played. Perhaps there are better comparisons out there. Let me know in the comments. But I think the one out of the ones that I've played, this one reminds me a lot of Age of Steam. Mechanically, both games are quite different, admittedly, but aside from the route building, which is kind of shared between the two games, I think that assessing the variable game setup at the beginning of the game really offers a certain direction in which to place routes and which directions to take strategically. There is a variable setup to Imperial Steam that allows for this to happen. In addition, Age of Steam features bidding throughout the game for player powers and such, and Imperial Steam only has one bid opportunity for players, and that's at the beginning of the game for player order. But it's also significant because it will dictate where you may be able to hire workers, which cities you can hire from at the beginning. Typically, the more you pay, the more options you have. And so it might also dictate, because of your order, not only the workers that you might be able to buy for cheaper prices, but also where you might try to build out your route first. Another route builder to compare this game to is Brass. I think Brass and Imperial Steam are very highly interactive games, just like Imperial Steam. They both feature really tough decisions every turn, not only where you're trying to build out from and where to place your routes, but to assess what kind of actions to take first before someone else might take advantage of that certain action and beat you to a better price or even that action in general. For example, in Brass, reaching markets first and placing industries in cities before other people allows you to take advantage of that economy later. For example, placing an iron industry and being able to refill those markets, or a coal industry when someone else needs to build track, that allows them to benefit off of what you placed as you've played that first. And Imperial Steam, making those deliveries to the cities before others, rewards you with a lot of money that will really help you get out of the extreme tightness in the earlier parts of the game. Finally, I wanted to mention a Splotter game here, namely Indonesia, perhaps because I have played this fairly recently, but both games feature tight interactive gameplay that can punish you if you miscalculate early on in the game, such as with the bidding in Imperial Steam for player order or just taking one action after someone else and not prioritizing that. That can really punish you early on in the game. And splatter games, namely Indonesia, uh, can punish you as well if you make some mistakes early in the game. The other comparison is that Imperial Steam does have some variability. There's a deck of cards that dictates where certain cities are placed at the beginning of the game. There's a little bit of that to some extent in Indonesia. It's not quite as drastic when you build that map out and reveal where those cities are placed. But those slight changes do have drastic changes to where you build out from an Imperial Steam, which routes you take versus what companies you want to try to acquire and potentially merge in Indonesia. So I found some comparisons there. Moving on to peer review, I gathered comments from Board Game Geek to see what people's experiences with this game have been in the last few years since its release. On a positive note, this game tailors to those who like a game with a pretty tight economy and highly interactive gameplay. Most people mention how the multitude of opportunities in this game mesh really well together. It creates a really nice flow amongst the different actions. They intertwine together. One thing leads to another. And there aren't a lot of things that don't thematically or mechanically feel out of place or just kind of put in there for no good reason. Other games that feature this type of gameplay in different ways that I didn't explicitly mention before in game comparisons, but you can make the argument that games like Agricola and Barrage uh, speak to how a lot of people made that comparison and kind of speak to how they feel about Imperial Steam as being compared to some of those great games. However, this is a turnoff for many players as well. The number one comment for those who had negative things to say about this game was that it was too punishing. And you can lose from the onset in the first turn or two, even if you bid incorrectly. Even before starting the game, you could potentially set yourself up for a loss. And if you take an action after someone else and don't prioritize it, like I mentioned before, that could ruin your game as well. Also, in comparison to other games like Brass, focusing on Brass again. Some people say that when both games may or may not be hard to learn, hard to teach, hard to set up, but also it's not as positively interactive as, say, Brass is. A lot of the uh, interactions in Brass, like you can utilize someone else's industry for your own benefit. They get a benefit as well. You play off of each other in a somewhat positive way to progress the game. And one person mentioned this and noticed that that doesn't really happen in Imperial Steam. There's nothing that one player can do to really benefit the action of someone else. There's always a punishment. If someone builds a route, you have to pay them to build on that certain route again, for example. So that adds to the punishing nature of this game, which can be quite the turnoff for some players. Finally, my rating for this game after a couple of plays is 8.5. And here's a breakdown of all of my criteria and where I score each of these categories. Yes, I think this game is very punishing. But I've kind of been into these types of games recently, like Age of Steam and Splatter games. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to check out and play this game. I heard about it back in 2021. It sounded appealing, but it wasn't until now that I finally had the chance to play it. I admit that this game has the opportunity to make you feel like you're drowning with no help if you make a critical mistake early in the game. Speaking from experiences in other games, it's not fun to be so far behind everyone else, out of the race for first place or even second or third. And sure, you can say that you enjoy the mechanisms and just being there, and maybe being there socially is fine too. But it makes, I think, for a more engaging game night if you are still a part of the race for first as well, and you give it your all and you're competitive. And so I would say that Imperial Steam definitely demands that you bring your A game if you want to play and feel like you're participating somewhat equally with everyone else. Strategically, I've also heard that this game kind of feels scripted from the get-go. You have to get workers while they're cheap earlier on, and if you don't, then you fall behind. There are other ways to kind of pursue that. and ultimately like building down and out, focusing on building your railways seems to be the most lucrative thing to do in this game. And perhaps that is a part of the appeal to this game. There are plenty of games that I do enjoy where the final destination, what you want to try to do in this game, literally get to Trieste or at least close to it and build out to other cities. That is the point of the game, and everything else you do is secondary to support that. And there are, like I mentioned, many of other games that kind of do this, right? Agricola, you are building a farm. You may or may not build your farm kind of the same way and try to go for the same goals every time. But the way that you take that journey throughout the game is different because of the different little directions that the cards give you. And so it is with Imperial Steam with the variable setup and the different focuses, the different contracts, etc., that kind of offer a slightly different way to approach the game. Some people might find it repetitive, but others might find it cozy in a sense, something that is predictable. And those slight variations really make the game feel approachable again because you are going to kind of rinse and repeat through the same kind of actions, gain money, spend money, build track, do other things. But the order in which you do it and the minute directions that you take this game might be something that you appreciate about this game and makes it feel different. And that's how I feel about it. I think that's what appeals to me is that somewhat coziness of this game and relative to how it's played every time. The solo mode was interesting to me. I felt like Turksy solo modes have been quite difficult to learn and run in the past, but in this case, it took some time to understand, but I felt like it only took like a half a game or so to fully understand the action cards, understand and decipher what is on them with minimal referencing to the rulebook. There were times that I felt like the opponent wasn't taking the most optimal actions. I think, maybe there were some opportunities that I missed out, some rules that I missed while operating. Uh, I think this would be an excellent game digitally, whether it's solo or not, just because there are a lot of little rules to understand and it's easy to forget. It's not like a splatter game where it's fairly straightforward to understand the game, and the game itself just kind of speaks for itself in how difficult it may be. Versus Imperial Steam, I think there is a bit of rules burden which kind of held back my overall rating for that area in this game. But as for the other areas, other criteria, I think this game really could play in a good amount of time. I think it does offer a great strategic and those turn by turn decisions every turn in a good amount of time. So I gave high ratings for those. This game is quite tight economically, and once again, the strategic nature of this game might be or feel repetitive. You're going after the same things, but the slight differences make this game have a meaningful variability to me and therefore helps with its replayability. I think you do need to have a high level of understanding of this game to play it well and to, just to play it, but also to play it well. I think it will continue to show different ways to approach the game that might be meaningful. And once again, like I think this game would really benefit from a digital version, not only to keep track of all the bookkeeping, but also to help with replayability and to decipher and discover some of those minute strategies that might make this game feel dramatically different from what has been shown so far with limited plays. So in sum, I forgot to mention the thematic integration. While it's not flashy, your business people running railroad, that has been done many times. But I feel like everything mechanically really fits with that. It's a very economically driven game, and I do admit that I feel like I am running a business, so it's pretty good. So in sum, I really like this game. I want to play more of it. I recognize it's not for everyone since it's quite punishing. But if you're up for that kind of experience, if you prepare ahead of time, I quite recommend this game. I play a practice round or two to get used to the actions, and I think it will deliver in a very positive way if everyone is on the same page and everyone is playing at their A game. So if you do like the other game comparisons that I mentioned, and you haven't tried this game out from a couple years ago, I highly recommend that you try it and see if it's a game for you. I really like this game. So that's my so those are all my thoughts on Imperial Steam. Let me know what you think about this game if you played it, or if you haven't, why you haven't or not. Just let me know what you think. And thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.